Orotone IC, 1970s. This is the documentation of the experience of a hobby project, made with the hope that it could be helpful to others. This video shows only a simple cleaning, fixing, and recapping process, and there is no extra written documentation attached to it. This is an AM/FM transistor radio made in Hong Kong, branded Orotone, about which very little information is available today. This unit was found in Italy, and it is important to observe that the FM band is complete, from 88 to 108 MHz. This model is almost identical to the 12F14 appearing in the DOC TSF archive. There is very little about Orotone in the magazines of that period. This is the same advert appearing in two Italian electronic magazines, CQ Elettronica and Radio Elettronica, both of them dated December 1975. The advertised model is the 12015, slightly different from the item under restoration, which unfortunately lost its original label. However, the name on the front plate shows Orotone IC, maybe suggesting that the radio could contain integrated circuits. In fact, the radio contains a Motorola Custom 4-pin IC number 4021-240 with an unknown function. The radio has silicon transistors, except two germanium ones for the final audio stage. But unfortunately, there is no schematic diagram for any Orotone radio available. The radio also contains two particular electrolytic capacitor types for Orion Japan and four small ones that could be confused for germanium transistors. The telescopic antenna is broken, so that it is possible to pull out most of it completely. Then the knobs on top of the dial are also removed. In order to open the radio case, it is necessary to remove three screws on the bottom. However, in this item, one of them is missing. The back panel can be lifted and removed. The band switch selector is observed. Before extracting the corresponding plastic sliding knob on the side of the case, a screw must be removed. In order to remove the headphones connector, a special screw must be released. Relatively strong tweezers help in the process. This radio uses an early power connector, similar to the Type C7, but incompatible with it. The extraction of the power connector and of the battery terminals is a little bit challenging. There are four screws holding the main radio board, but only three of them are in this item. The remaining parts, the power transformer and the loudspeaker, are held to the front shell of the case with screws that have been tightened to the extreme and are hard to remove. The remaining part of the telescopic antenna can now be removed. One last screw refuses to let go and prefers to break. Also, the handle of the case is removed. The radio is tested with the help of a bench power supply, providing 6 volts DC. So far, so good. Time for cleaning. For cleaning the upper part of the circuit board, some alcohol is sprayed and then removed with an air blower. Before doing anything else, it seems a good idea to insulate the wires ending to the power connector using heat shrink sleeves. The 2 potentiometers, one for the volume and the other for the tone control, are removed temporarily, and some Vaseline oil is used for cleaning them. Some Vaseline oil is used also for the contacts of the band switch selector. The radio is still working, and that is comforting. The most accessible electrolytic capacitor is removed and tested. The meter reads more than the triple of the nominal capacitance, which suggests that there is a significant electrical leakage inside the old component. Therefore, all the 4 Orion electrolytic capacitors are changed. However, later more electrolytic capacitors are discovered and changed. The radio is still working, and this time it is tested also powering it from the mains. For preventing electrocution accidents, good insulating gloves are used. The case of the radio has a distinctive look, as if it had a wood veneer finish, divided into small squares, each one with a small round cavity in the middle, which significantly slows down the cleaning process. Observing closely this particular pattern, one could notice that all these small squares and cavities are different, showing that someone had to intervene manually in the finishing process of the case. This very accelerated clip is here only to show how each square centimeter of this pattern needs its own attention while cleaning. The lacquer on the aluminum decoration is significantly scratched. However, the removal of this aluminum sheet appears impossible without ruining it or the plastic case. Therefore, it is judged safer to leave it where it is and to use some very fine sandpaper for erasing those signs. It is also necessary to reglue one side of this aluminum decoration. Super glue is applied for the purpose. The handle is chrome plated, but it shows several rust dots. The rust is removed by applying some gel rust removal twice, washing it with alcohol. The plastic part of the handle is cleaned with alcohol and a toothbrush. When everything is clean, the handle is installed back on the front shell of the radio case. In place of the original soft washers, new nylon equivalents are used. The original telescopic antenna was made for being pulled out up to a point where it could be tilted and rotated at will. Unfortunately, the larger element of the antenna, which was responsible for preventing a full extraction while allowing the intended function, was damaged. The plan is to adapt a copper washer to stop the internal part of the antenna from being extracted completely. This washer was meant to be soldered on top of the larger antenna element, but it appears impossible to solder on it. A piece of thin metal sheet, recovered from a used spray can, is prepared for a backup plan. A pipe large enough for enclosing the last antenna element is made with this metal sheet. The new plan is to solder the copper washer on top of this new antenna sleeve. To reduce the chances for the user of the radio to get in contact with the solder, which contains lead, an insulation sleeve is added on the upper part. Originally, the antenna had a black plastic element on the upper part for sitting on top of the dial. That plastic had to be removed to allow placing the metal sleeve that was just added. Therefore, a grommet is used for obtaining a similar aesthetic effect. The metal sleeve is fixed to the external body of the antenna using hot glue. The bottom part of the antenna requires some insulation. The factory attached some black electrical tape. Here some heat shrink pipe is used instead. The telescopic antenna is finally repaired. The radio is slowly put back together. All the screws used are new because the original ones were damaged. Unfortunately, only 3 screws can be used for the speaker because one broke, leaving the threaded rod stuck. Some solder is applied to the top of the coil used as a negative terminal for the battery compartment. This is done to obtain a better contact with the batteries. The knobs are cleaned using alcohol, cotton balls, a toothbrush, and a very thin metal tool to reach the curling grooves. Before putting the clean knobs back in place, it is necessary to prepare some felt to reduce the friction on the dial glass. telescopic antenna is extracted and tilted for listening to the FM band. In this area, the FM band is populated by many local stations.
Radio 80 ha presentato il cinema alla radio, i migliori trailer degli anni 80. 149 euro e rata finale.
For the AM band, there is a dedicated internal ferrite rod. Therefore, the telescopic antenna is not necessary. Unfortunately, the AM band reception is not very sensitive, but in the evening it is still decent.
Bálint Ágnes, Kukori és Kotkoda saját kacsok.